The floor exploded before anyone could scream. Glass rained from the ceiling like ice shattering over marble, and in the chaos of smoke and fire, one figure did not run. She dropped to a knee, calm as still water, while grown men twice her size scattered like frightened birds. In seconds, the world would learn her name. But right now, all anyone could see was a woman everyone had laughed at 20 minutes earlier, the one they called kitchen staff, the only person in the building who wasn't afraid. Because she already knew this was coming. If you want to know exactly how she knew, hit subscribe right now, because this story only gets more insane from here. Let's go. 2 hours earlier, the lobby of Vance Global Holdings had been calm. Cold marble, cold air, cold stairs. A dozen of the most decorated security operatives in the country sat waiting, men who'd led tactical squads, broken bones for a living, men with medals and scars to prove it. Then the glass doors opened, and Maeve Vance walked in. She wasn't tactical. She wasn't loud. She carried a worn canvas backpack and a plain folder, and she moved like someone who had nowhere urgent to be. A contractor with a scarred jaw smirked first. "Hey, look, kitchen staff found the executive en trance." Laughter rippled through the room. Maeve didn't flinch. She walked to the desk like the sound hadn't reached her. "Maeve Vance," she said. "Here for the principal protection interview." The receptionist blinked at her, then at the schedule. "For Mr. Vance? The one who's survived 3 assassination attempts this year?" "You sure?" "I'm aware," Maeve said simply. She took a seat in the corner, opened her folder, and read. Around her, whispers kept crawling. Is she going to protect him by sitting on the shooters? She said nothing. She didn't need to. 2 hours passed. Applicant after applicant went into the inner office and came out pale. Finally, the doors opened and Garrick stepped through, the chief of security, rigid, decorated, allergic to anything that looked like weakness. He scanned his tablet, then looked up at Maeve, his eyebrows lifting in open disbelief. "Is this a joke?" he said, walking straight at her. "You're applying to protect Arthur Vance? Look around this room. These men served in elite units. What exactly makes you think you belong here?" Maeve looked him dead in the eye. "Because they're trained to react to a threat. I'm trained to prevent one." Garrick actually laughed. He didn't take her folder. "We don't have time for amateur hour. Interview's over." Maeve stood, quiet, unbothered. "I hope your team's as flawless as your ego, Chief." She turned to leave. She never got the chance. 3 floors up, in a room lined wall-to-wall with security monitors, Arthur Vance had been watching the whole thing. He wasn't looking at the muscle. He was looking at her. While every other applicant killed time on their phones, Maeve's eyes had spent 2 hours tracing the ceiling sprinklers, the blind spots in the camera coverage, the rhythm of the guard rotations. "Interesting," Arthur murmured. "She wasn't waiting for an interview. She was mapping my building." Before his assistant could answer, the monitors flickered white, then red. The explosion tore through the parking garage below and the whole tower shuddered. Emergency lights bled through the lobby. The elite operatives, the ones who'd laughed, drew their weapons in a frenzy, shouting over each other, no plan, no order. Masked gunmen breached the entrance in a tight, disciplined line, smoke grenades hissing across the marble floor. Garrick screamed into his radio. "Get him to the penthouse bunker. Secure the elevators." Static answered. Comms were jammed. While the elite scattered behind pillars, Maeve dropped behind a marble planter, her face unreadable. A terrified applicant crawled beside her, hands shaking around his pistol. "How are you not panicking?" "Panic's a luxury for the dead," she said quietly, watching the gunmen's formation. They weren't executing a massacre. They were hurting. Garrick barked to his men. "They're pushing toward the stairwell. Cut them off on 3. Don't." Maeve's voice cut through the gunfire. Garrick spun on her, furious. "Stay down and shut up." "They're not rushing the stairs," Maeve said. "They're forcing you into it." He ignored her. "Move." His men charged into the stairwell. Maeve closed her eyes and counted. 1, 2. The secondary charge detonated, and the stairwell folded in on itself in a wall of fire and screaming dust. Garrick was thrown backward into the lobby, soot-covered, radio gone, staring at the smoking ruin where his men had just been standing. He turned to Maeve, and for the first time, there was no arrogance left in his face. Only horror. "How did you know?" he said, voice cracking. "Because if I were the one hitting Arthur Vance," Maeve said, slinging her backpack over her shoulder, "I'd cut off his security's fastest route to him first. Elevators are dead. Stairs are gone. Follow me if you want to live. If your heart is racing right now, comment, 'I'm still watching' below. Let's see how many of you make it to the end of this one." Garrick had spent 15 years building a reputation on discipline, and in the span of 90 seconds, a woman he'd mocked had just outthought him in front of his own men. He didn't argue again. He followed her. Maeve led them past the main halls to an unmarked hatch labeled HVAC maintenance. "This connects to the old freight shafts," she said. "That's been sealed for years," Garrick coughed through the smoke. "Locked from the inside." "Locked from this side," she said, kneeling, running her fingers along the frame until she found a dust-caked manual bypass. It clicked open. "The syndicate studied your building, Garrick. They don't know the parts of it you forgot existed." They slipped into the dark. Boots echoed through the grates above them, disciplined, unhurried. The gunmen were already on the executive floor. "We're not making it in time," one guard whispered. Maeve looked up at a steam pipe running the length of the ceiling. "We don't have to outrun them. We just have to blind them." She grabbed an iron wrench off a maintenance rack and pointed to a pressure valve. "Hit that. It floods the corridor with steam and trips the environmental lockdown." The valve shattered. Steam roared upward into the vents, and the shouting above turned to confused chaos in seconds. They breached the executive floor through a service panel into a haze of white mist and flashing red alarms. When a gunman emerged from the fog, rifle raised, Maeve didn't reach for a weapon. She swept his rifle aside with the wrench and slammed him into the wall before he could make a sound. They found Arthur Vance still standing in his office, revolver in hand, composed but cornered. "Mr. Vance," Garrick said, breathless. "We move you to the loading dock. There's an armored transport waiting." "The dock's compromised," Maeve said, eyes on a dead terminal screen. "You don't know that," Garrick snapped. "They blocked every road outside," she said. "They wouldn't leave the basement open unless they wanted you funneled into it." Arthur stepped forward slowly, studying her face like he was seeing a ghost. "You have your father's eyes, Maeve." The room seemed to go quiet around her. "You knew my father?" "Marcus Vance," Arthur said, gunfire rattling the door behind them. "My chief strategist, 20 years ago. The syndicate killed him because he wouldn't sell out our network. I've been looking for you since the day they buried him." There was no time to feel it. The door was already splintering. "There's a freight lift behind the false bookshelf," Arthur said. "It needs a manual override from the sub-basement." They crammed inside as bullets tore through the office behind them, the lift groaning downward into the dark. When the doors opened onto the loading dock, Maeve's warning proved true. A dozen armed men stood waiting, black SUVs boxing in every exit, led by a broad-shouldered commander named Kalen. "End of the line, Vance," Kalen shouted, his voice bouncing off the concrete. "Drop the guns and maybe you'll help lives." Garrick raised his sidearm, but they were outgunned 3-1. Maeve's eyes climbed the walls to a massive industrial crane hanging above the dock, its control booth 40 feet away across an exposed catwalk. "Keep them talking," she whispered. "What are you doing?" Garrick hissed. "Finishing my father's job. Before you find out what happens next, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it." She broke from cover and sprinted for the ladder. "Kill her," Kalen roared, and the dock erupted in gunfire. Bullets chewed the concrete at her heels, sparks flying off the rungs as Garrick and the guards laid down desperate cover fire, buying her every second they had left in their lungs. Maeve threw herself into the booth as a bullet shattered the side glass. She didn't flinch. She slammed the main breaker, and the crane roared awake overhead, its iron hook swinging like a pendulum of judgment. She grabbed the controls and aimed the full weight of 10 tons of steel at the line of SUVs. The hook crashed into the lead vehicle, flipping it into the next, the chain of explosions swallowing the dock in fire and smoke, cutting off Kalen's men completely. "Now, move." Maeve's voice cracked through the booth speaker. Arthur, Garrick, and the surviving guards sprinted through the gap in the smoke toward a hidden armored vehicle. Maeve dropped from the catwalk and slid behind the wheel just as Kaylin staggered out of the fire, rifle rising. She floored it. The truck tore through the concrete barrier into daylight, leaving the wreckage of an empire behind it. 2 weeks later, the dust had settled, literally and otherwise. Every scrap of evidence from that night had handed international authorities everything they needed to dismantle the syndicate for good. The lobby had been rebuilt, stronger, quieter, sharper. The same men who'd laughed at Maeve stood in a straight line now, heads bowed, saying nothing. Arthur Vance walked to the front of the room with Garrick beside him, humility written all over a face that used to hold none. Arthur held open a velvet box containing the golden crest of Global Director of Security and turned to Maeve, who stood exactly as she had the first day, same blazer, same folder, same quiet. 2 weeks ago, Arthur said, loud enough for the whole room, people in this building judged you by what they could see. They looked at muscle. They never looked at mind. You saved my life. You honored a debt I owed your father for 20 years. So I'm asking you properly this time. He extended the box. Maeve Vance, will you accept the position of Chief of Global Security? Nobody laughed this time. Garrick was the first to salute. Then the whole room followed. Maeve allowed herself the smallest smile. I accept, she said. And our first order of business is retraining every single one of you. The room broke into applause as she turned toward the doors, sunlight pouring in, the same doors she'd walked through 2 weeks ago as a joke, and walked back through now as the reason everyone in that building was still alive. Sometimes the people who look the least dangerous are the ones who were 3 steps ahead the entire time. Not every quiet person in the room is underestimating themselves. Sometimes, they're just letting you underestimate them until it's too late to matter. If this story hit you the way it hit us, to write it, subscribe, drop a comment telling us which moment got you the most, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength still wins. We'll see you in the next one.